I'm Dave Cawley, investigative journalist and host of the podcast Cold. In October of 1985, a woman named Cherie Warren left work at a busy Salt Lake City office
to meet her estranged husband at a downtown auto dealership.
She never made it home. Cherie's car surfaced weeks later in Las Vegas.
In the parking lot of a hotel casino.
No one knows how it got there.
Strange. It was strange.
Both Cherie's estranged husband and her boyfriend raised suspicion for investigators.
I kind of thought that he might have done something.
But no arrests were ever made. In Cold Season 3, we dig into double lives, make new connections in the case, and examine the difficulty raised by reasonable doubt.
We want answers just as much as anyone else.
They have creeps like that now too, so nothing's changed.
That's the new Cold Season 3, The Search for Cherie, now available anywhere you get your podcasts.
Hey, you're listening to Project Recovery. This is a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's about recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great.
Hey, so do you want to know what I learned this week?
Yes.
How much do you
Did you read it in a book?
Nope.
Oh,
nope.
okay.
This is real life experience.
That's Casey's jam.
Yeah. So, how much do you sanitize?
Like myself or my...
Yeah, like because the new norm is
I
everywhere
bathe every day, thank you.
No, I meant like hand sanitizer.
Oh, okay.
Because that's the new norm. Everywhere you go, everybody's got a different kind of
I have to admit, I still do, but I've kind of fallen. I have an office where a few people are still coming in to see me, and I'm really good about door handles and all of that. Around the house, we're probably just back to being sloppy, I don't know.
Because we
try.
Yeah, because I think for a while there was a shortage of sanitizer.
Right, and I found I scoured my house and I found like 8 of those little mini bottles, and they were lined up on the counter so the kids could use them anytime. They're almost out now.
But there was a lot of people that were making their own hand sanitizer.
Right.
And I went to a restaurant in Salt Lake 2 days ago, and I walked up, and I was going to sanitize my hands because we were getting ready to touch the menu and do some eating. Uh-huh. And I looked at it, and it was like this yellow color. It was a urine color.
Oh.
And I was like,
that doesn't seem right.
It was in a name brand container.
Okay. That doesn't mean anything.
So I'm inquisitive. Yeah. I'm a journalist,
Yes, you are.
So I said to the lady, I was like, hey, what's up with that sanitizer?
Yeah.
And she goes, oh, the boss tried to make it himself. So he made his own sanitizer.
Tried to make it himself.
Yeah.
You don't put that out for the customers.
But I was like, well, I'll give it a shot. She goes, it works, but it smells a little funky.
Yeah.
So sure enough, I put it on my hands.
Yeah.
It smelled a little funky.
Had
but
to
I
go
think
wash your hands.
I think the funky smell means it was doing its job. It was a little pony.
If that's what you have to tell yourself, sure.
Yeah. Well, I haven't got the COVID.
Okay.
I'm wearing masks. So that was my first experience with sanitizer.
I haven't been to the restaurants. Are people wearing? I haven't been to a restaurant since this started. Are people wearing masks in the restaurants?
I know most people wear them to get in, but once you're in, you're in.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you have to keep putting it on and taking it off between bites.
I didn't know. That's why I'm asking.
Well, I tried to take you out to dinner last week, and you canceled.
I did. Well, my girlfriend, we thought she had the COVID.
And that was it. I appreciate that.
So she wasn't feeling well, but she doesn't have it.
But the other thing is that some sanitizer doesn't allow me to drive my car.
Oh,
because it's alcohol-based. And I still have a breathalyzer in my car.
So do the fumes from that get into the
I got into my car. I turned the key on. I hit the little button. It read 6032. 6032 is how many times I've blown into my car in the past year.
Wow.
I pull it up to my mouth. I'm getting ready to do the...
Yeah, it's blowing. Thanks for demonstrating.
Yeah. But I blow on it, and it goes 000.2. And it goes... And I'm like, what is going on? And so I'm thinking, I'm like, did I put cologne on? Because sometimes cologne will set it off because it's alcohol-based. You can't have cologne in rehab.
Well, your cologne is.
Yeah, yeah. The good stuff. You get it at Walmart.
Right. Buy in bulk, baby.
That's right. And so, but there's certain sanitizer out there.
That makes sense.
And there's one that I go to a gym up in Ogden, and it smells like alcohol. And I would put that on, and I was like, that smells familiar.
I think I know what you're going to say. Is it one of the alcohol companies.
So I look at it. It's Five Wives.
Five Wives.
Five Wives hand sanitizer.
Yeah, a bunch of those companies have switched over in the crisis to making hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
Right?
And so I was like, I can't use that stuff because I'll never be able to start my car. But it was pretty cool. So that's just something I learned. Hey, you're listening to Project Recovery Radio here, and we've got a great guest for you. His name is simple, but his story is extreme. Is that safe to say?
Yeah.
Well,
I think you nailed it. You're a journalist.
Yeah, but we don't even know his story. But the reason I wanted him on the show is I follow SOAR, which is used to be WAR, Workout Addiction Recovery up in Ogden.
Maybe we'll find out why they changed their name, but I like the new name better.
Yeah, I follow them on Instagram.
Yeah.
And they had a picture of this young man. Chris, how old are you?
36.
And it said, it's amazing to see
a 36-year-old is a young man to us.
All right.
Okay, sorry, that distracted me.
No, it's okay. Yeah. But it said, it's amazing that this man is lifting anything because he should have lost his arm. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So before we get to that, let's hear your story, and then hopefully you'll be able to tell us what that's all about in a bit.
Sure. So essentially, my story starts, I grew up south side of Chicago, not the south side of Chicago that everyone thinks of, but like south suburbs with my parents. Great upbringing, had no issues, no like traumatic incidents or anything like that. Got through school, did well.
Because I think it's interesting that he says that because, there's two schools of thought on, this, that sometimes people are gravitated toward substances because of a traumatic past, but some of them just go to it because they think it's going to be fun. And it sounds like you went to it just because it was going to be fun?
Essentially, yeah. It was kind of like, I don't know, the stories you hear about people experimenting and then finding, like having this epiphany when they first take a drug. And for me, it was opiates, it was Vicodin, and it just hit me. And it was like like I said, it was like almost like a new normal where I hadn't felt that way in the past. Like for as long as I can remember, I always had this little bit of, I don't know, darkness in my brain where I was living in the shadows and wasn't quite, I don't know, I guess what I considered myself. And then as soon as I experimented with Vicodin is when it kicked it off, and I just felt this like ease that I had never felt before.
So growing up as a kid and as a teenager, you said you felt a darkness. Like, are we talking depression, anxiety?
Yeah.
What do you think it was?
Obviously at the time when you're growing up, you don't have like those terms. You're not like aware of it exactly.
And mostly you don't have anything to compare it to. I mean, you're just you, right?
Right,
so,
exactly. And it was, it wasn't sharing with anybody because, like I said, I didn't know what it was, so I kind of would just bury it, and it was always feeling like I was always kind of on the outside of the circle, where I was never like, I never, even though I was, like I said, my childhood was amazing. It was, no issues, but I always felt like I was a little bit over in the shadow, like I was a little further out where I wasn't quite connected.
And that can be kind of a biologically inherited propensity towards anxiety. So anxiety kind of creates this hypervigilant awareness of oneself. And so people often feel like they're on the outside looking in. They can't quite integrate. They always have this kind of looming sense of, I wonder how I look, how I feel. Are other people looking at me? And that's just how you process things. And you look at somebody like Casey Scott, who's just like jumping in the mix and running around and completely having a good time. And you're like, why can't I be that guy? Why am I so self-aware? And a term for that is kind of like being on stage. It's almost like, I feel like everyone's looking at me. I know they're not, but is that kind of what you're talking about?
I mean, the self-consciousness, it's something that I like my default is like a cold sweat. I'm constantly like that. And that's just how I operate. And, like I can become like gregarious and open and everything, but it's just like, it takes me a long time. And it's like a self-consciousness. Everything I say, like I trip over myself because I'll be analyzing every word or like every movement I make. So I just kind of take myself out of situations instead of, engaging.
But see, that's weird because on the flip side of that coin, my default is outgoing and gregarious. When I get nervous and when I get, is when it's got to be just me thinking about myself. I go to that place real easily. I don't like going in at all.
I think you're kind of an extrovert, right?
Yeah.
And an extrovert is somebody who kind of recharges their batteries by connecting with other people and being out there. So when you don't have that opportunity, then you start to feel
that's the scary time for me.
Yeah, the scary time. And I think what you're describing is just kind of classic anxiety. It's nobody's fault. There was no event that happened. I think we really downplay in normal culture the contribution of our biology to things like anxiety and depression. And so a lot of kids grow up just exactly. I can't tell you how many kids I work with that say exactly what you just said. Like, I always felt self-conscious, self-aware, uncomfortable, and I can become gregarious and outgoing, but it probably is kind of exhausting for you, right? And you're kind of looking forward to that time when you can kind of go be alone. And so that's more that anxious, introverted personality structure, which isn't bad, but when you're a kid, it doesn't fit the social norms you want to be part of.
Right.
But you said you took Vicodin and it was a life changer.
Yeah, I was off.
How old were you?
I think the first time I tried it, I would have been about 17. It was like right at the end of high school.
Were you drinking and
I was
smoking weed before that?
Yeah,
or anything?
I smoked weed constantly, and the weird thing is for me, weed basically just accelerates that anxiety. It just amplifies it.
Yeah,
I still did it.
Yeah, you still did it because you wanted to feel different.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's funny because we're learning a lot about marijuana in our culture now, with different states passing laws where it's recreational or medicinal, and more research is happening. And what we're finding is it may not be as great for managing anxiety as was once thought, because so many people have what's called a paradoxical reaction. Instead of relaxing and feeling comfortable, you actually might trigger, and you might have one time you smoke and you feel pretty good, and the next time you get paranoid and anxious and like crawling out of your skin. And so it's an interesting drug in that way, especially for people that are pretty anxious by nature.
Right, and that's exactly what it would do. It would kick that off. And
how old were you when you started smoking? And
I'd say the first time I drank, I was about 14, and just got extremely drunk on rum, and then woke up the next day and just like a pool of vomit. And it didn't stop me from doing it again like the next weekend. And then weed was probably about same, maybe 14, 15.
Can I ask how you got the first Vicodin? Was it from a prescription, or was it just somebody goes, hey, you should try this?
Well, actually I have to go back, because the first opiate I ever did was Ultram. So tramadol, basically, and it was just through my dad. He had a prescription, or he had surgery, and he had these little 4 packets, and I just grabbed a few of them, tried them, and then it was like all of this was in a few-week period, and then it turned into Vicodin. I believe it was from a friend that had them and was just kind of passing them out, and it was just like one of those situations where it was just experimenting, like, here, try that, and I was like, okay.
Were you curious to try your dad's prescription, or
yeah, it was just, it was there, and I was like, yeah, I want to, it was, I guess it goes back to that wanting to kind of escape, that escape mentality.
Kind of driven to find something that made you feel better.
And honestly, it's like to this day, I can't remember ever like seeking it out, ever being like, ever like doing any research or anything like that. Like, oh, this is going to do it, or hearing it from anyone else. It was kind of like a serendipitous type.
Yeah, when you're
moment.
a kid, I mean, it's, kids experiment with all sorts of things.
Right.
You're listening to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, more importantly about recovery. It's brought to you by our friends at useonlyasdirected.org. They got a 3-part solution: speak out, opt out, and of course, throw out. We're listening to Chris Jones talk about his story and road into addiction. We're going to find out more about that in just a few minutes.
It's the story of an American held in a dark Venezuelan prison.
Then all of a sudden they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
I'm Becky Bruce. I spent a year working on Hope in Darkness, which now has more than 2 million downloads. Find it on kslpodcast.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, you're listening to Project Recovery. We're listening to Chris Jones' story. He's up in the SOAR program in Ogden. This program is brought to you by useonlyasdirected.org. Casey, you just did this. Why are you doing it again? Well, because I'm supposed to do it at the beginning of the podcast, and I forgot, so now I'm making up for it. They got a 3-part solution: speak out, opt out, and, of course, throw out. Hey, we've got Chris Jones here from the south side of Chicago, not the south side of Chicago.
The nice south side.
Yeah, the nice south side.
Yeah.
And he's talking about his foray into drug addiction. Really, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And you said you started out with a prescription from your dad that escalated to you finding Vicodin on the streets, and that seemed to be pretty rapid.
Yeah, it was extremely rapid. It was within a week or two, and I remember it was right towards the end of high school, and it was prom was like it was right within that week, because that was like my first actual memory of using Vicodin. It was going to prom and like and the thing is, like, you know, I had plenty of friends and was, you know, happy, popular, whatever in high school, but like anytime I'd go to a dance, I wasn't an outgoing type. But then I went to prom and I was out there like dancing and doing everything that like I'd never done before, because I'd felt so, you know, quote unquote comfortable with myself. And it was I don't know, it was a mind-blowing experience.
But see, the thing about that, what I don't think people who don't have an addict brain, that reinforces that these pills are doing something good for me, not something bad. I've never had this night before. I was the life of the party. I was dancing. All my friends were like, "Hey, Chris, man, this is crazy. You had so much fun," which you probably heard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Completely. I was like, "Where's this guy been? Who is this person?" You know. And like my girlfriend at the time, she's like, "You always want to leave early. You never want to hang out at the dance. You never want to do anything like this." And it just, I don't know. It was like I said, it was like a new person, and I heard that consistently. Like, you know, it's, you know, whatever it was, I was just so much more comfortable with myself, and it was just such a strange feeling that I'd never been through before.
And I think one of the, I don't know, scary things about that actually is if you think about the age you were. Like, you know, at our age, Casey, I mean, I don't know if I care if I'm the life of the party, if somebody thinks that or not. But when you're that age, that's all that matters, is that social
currency
feedback, right? I mean, that's it. If people think you're fun, if you're popular, if the girls like you, if the guys like you, like all that kind of stuff. And so that must have been tremendously reinforcing, more than money, more than anything, at that age, to have such a positive feedback from all your friends.
No, absolutely. And you know, something that going back to when I was about, I'd say 13, 12, going into middle school, I had like a incident where I had a friend group, and then when I got into school, I was basically ostracized. So I had no, like, I came into like this formative part of my life where with no
team.
Yeah, no social structure, no anything, and just felt like, you know, and I'd go to school, I'd like break out in hives every day because, not every day, but regularly, because I didn't want to go because I felt so alone, which I'm sure contributed to it. But then, like you said, feeling that acceptance was just like, you know, it was gold. It was just something I'd never, I mean, I had been accepted by my family, by that circle, but as far as like a friend circle, I'd never really had that before from that I could remember.
So after the dance, being the life of the party, how did your drug use escalate?
Went from, I started taking Vicodin pretty regularly. It was, you know, within the first few months, I was taking it every day until the point where I was probably taking, I don't know, the little yellow Norcos, the 10s, which are I guess the most powerful ones, the least amount of Tylenol. I became a street pharmacist really quickly, where I learned taking the least amount of Tylenol and the most amount of the hydrocodone would give me the best high. So like I would only look for the yellows. Obviously I'd take whatever I could get, but I was to the point where I was taking like 6 or 7 of those at a time. You know,
wow.
In one instance, and then within, I don't know, probably 2 years, maybe I'd say, probably by the time I was 20, maybe late 19th year, I found something called Oxycontin, which was, you know, just a step up from there. And it was just, you know, it was like a whole new experience, because, you know, obviously once you start taking some, you grow a tolerance, and, you know, you
need more.
Exactly. And I was taking so much of the Vicodin that like by the end of the day, my stomach would just hurt. And then like I started hearing things about like what Tylenol can do, and
isn't that funny? We'll poison our bodies with drugs, but they were like, but the Tylenol's really hurting me. You know what I mean? It's like, but that's in your addict brain.
Messed up logic.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
It's like, I don't want
to be unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was, you know, and then, like I said, I was introduced to Oxycontin, and then it kicked off a whole new round where I was just like, oh, this is way better. And at the time, like, this is something that was recurring. I was like, it's cheaper. Now it's cheaper because I only have to get a little bit of this. And then and then it was finding it, and then I had to start going to the streets a lot more. Where like Vicodin, you can always hit somebody up that has surgery. Somebody, I was like, find someone that has surgery, you become their best friend. And then when you like I said, once you progress to a certain point, you have to start finding larger amounts.
Hustling.
Yeah, exactly. And then the OxyContin, that was a lot harder to find. Then that's when I kind of had my first foray into going downtown into like in Bridgeport, which is a neighborhood in Chicago. It's a lot of kids who are just like street kids that can get anything. They can find anything, and you become friends with them. And then I became good friends with a few people and was finding it consistently. And then inevitably,
how are you paying for this?
My family, essentially, when I turned 18, my parents put me on like the bank account for my dad's company, and I was working there and stuff, and it was just that's how I supported my habit. Like it was just and then I was working, and in the beginning I was able to start that, and I did like an IRA and everything, got my started putting money away. Then within like 2 years, obviously I emptied that, but like I was able to support it for a while through myself, and I was able to handle it financially. But eventually, obviously, it started going away, and then finding other ways, stealing. I used to go to Home Depot and I knew exactly the way to do, like exactly the guy who was working and how strict he was as far as hearing the alarm go off. And I knew like the way to walk out, the way to pretend like I'm just walking out, and I just returned a bunch of stuff, and I just pile up one of those little flatbed dollies and just, walk out with a whole bunch of power tools, go to the job site and just start selling them out every Friday. Every time I knew the guys got paid, I knew they'd much rather buy a drill for $100 than $300, and it was cash. And then, essentially just doing that and then stepping it up from there, finding other ways. And that was it. I mean, that's how I operated for a long time.
And so you said you could pay for it yourself for about 2 years. Then you started going to the streets, got an education on stealing and figuring out how to feed your habit.
Exactly.
How long did that go on for?
Well, that kind of went on. It pretty much kind of the rest of the drug use.
What were your parents' thoughts about this? Did they notice anything changing in you when they noticed that you were taking money from the IRA and doing this? Did they ever have a talk with you?
Yeah. Well, I think the very first time what happened was it was kind of like a situation where a good friend of mine, and I didn't find out about this till years later, but a good friend of mine kind of dropped a note in my parents' mailbox. Was like, this is right when I started heroin, so it would have been like 20, because I did OxyContin for a very short time and jumped up to heroin pretty quick. And it was kind of like, hey, look, I don't want to be the one to do it, but like someone has to, and like Chris is using heroin. And then like immediately, and my dad, he had a lot of friends throughout the city, and so he knew a lot of, like, he didn't know what I was doing, but like he heard I was in certain areas that I shouldn't be. There's no reason for me to be there. And then him and my mom got together and they basically came to me and they're like, hey, you're going to rehab, and the crazy thing is like, this is back, well, it would have been 2006-ish, somewhere around there. And they sat me down and they're like, you're going to rehab. Where do you want to go? And they gave me like somewhere in Maine, Michigan, and then somewhere in Oklahoma or Newport Beach, California.
Newport.
Yeah, I was like,
Easy
Newport.
choice.
Yeah. The only problem was it happened to be a Scientology rehab. So that was a disaster.
Oklahoma doesn't sound so bad.
And this
I don't know. That sounds funky and weird.
Yeah, this is years before, like all the Going Clear and all the documentaries came out that like exposed Scientology for, what it is. And it was just like,
You're just hoping to hang with Tom Cruise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was great. I got to see Nicolas Cage on the beach all the time.
So did you really go out to the Scientology one?
I did, yeah.
And what was that like?
That was a trip. That was crazy. Like when I got there, the day I got there, it was like this 3-story house in Newport Beach, right on the beach, and a kid that the bed I took, he'd done a header off the top floor balcony. Like he wasn't sleeping, and they don't believe in any medical supervision whatsoever, like none. So they have clients who are just clients who are now the people in charge. Those are like the counselors, So it's like inmates running the asylum, essentially. So there's no, if you can't sleep, it doesn't matter. Like, and this kid hadn't. I don't know the backstory of it exactly. All I know is that he didn't die, but like just to get out of the place, he's just like, I'm getting out, and he just jumped off.
So it was a suicide attempt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that and I myself got to that point at one point because when I first got there, I hadn't slept for 17 days. I got to a point where it was, and I was fully
psychosis.
Yeah, delusional, hearing things like there were. As far as I was concerned, there were elves trying to climb up the side room to get up to me, and I was seriously considering at one point running up to one of the cops on the beaches, just and attacking him just to get tased so I could sleep, because I couldn't. I was in full psychosis.
So how long did you do the Scientology recovery in?
I was there for about a month, a little over a month, probably a month, just under a month and a half, and.
I'm curious, did they have any treatment model at all, or are they just housing you?
They do have a treatment model, and I put that in heavy quotations. It's just what they do is they have 8 books, all written by L. Ron Hubbard.
Right.
And the first book is called TRs, and I can't remember what that stands for exactly, but essentially they sit you down when you first get there, and you sit face to face with another person. And you just, at first, all you're doing is staring. You can't break eye contact. You can't do anything. So they start at like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, up to an hour, 2 hours. And then what they do is they bring someone in and just essentially verbally abuse you. Like they try to break you, quote unquote. I forgot what their terms were, but that's what they try to do. They just have someone point out flaws in you or find ways, and again, you can't react. So they're trying to I forget, it's like, break a veneer of insecurity or something, however they wanted to put it. But that's how they do it. And then you go through that and you progress through the books. Like I said, there's 8 books. So the first book, that's essentially what it is. The second book is the sauna. And I could be getting this wrong because it was years ago and I tried to block it out as much as I could. But it was the sauna, which is 5 hours a day in the sauna. Where you 5 hours straight. You just sit in the sauna for 5 hours. And take
I don't last 5 minutes.
And you take handfuls of niacin to the point where you break out. Like you regularly break out in hives. And I'd actually talked to my sister when I was out there, and she specifically told me, do not do that. She's like, don't take the niacin. So I was taking the and to progress, you have to have these like epiphany moments where you're like, oh, I feel the best I've ever felt. You just it's just BS, but it's like,
yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, and I was just taking the niacin and like throwing it in the handlebars of the bikes and stuff just to get rid of it, and then you're just to sit in there and not pass out. You're taking like handfuls of potassium, handfuls of sodium pills, and all that, and it was
sounds like hell.
It was wacky. It was nuts.
So you did about a month there, and then where did you go after that?
I left there the day they told me I had to scrub the fence with a toothbrush because I'd gotten in trouble for something. So I was like, this is crazy. I'm done. Left there, went to the airport. Obviously, I was clean that whole time. It'd been the first time I'd been clean and fully clean off everything for, I don't know, from everything, probably 4 years. And got to the airport immediately, the John Wayne Airport, the OC Airport, and I got drunk. I got hammered and then flew home. And by that night, I was meeting up with friends. And I remember my one friend picked me up, and he's like, and he was using at the time. And, he's like, what, how was it? Like, what happened? He's like curious to see what my mindset was. And I was just like, let's go. We're going immediately. So we immediately went and picked up that night. And then it was off from there. It continued. It was a cycle like that. I don't know, every year and a half or so, it would get to a point where it was obvious to everybody around me. I'd start to kind of get into a shell.
The wheels would start to fall off.
Correct.
People, you couldn't ignore it.
No, yeah, it's impossible to hide. You think you're hiding it. You think you're doing this great job of keeping everybody in the dark, but it's not the case at all. And every year and a half, I would start to get to a point, and then it would be like, okay, you're going back, you're going somewhere. And it wasn't never Scientology, thank God, again, but it was started to go to 12-step.
So how many recovery centers have you?
I've been to 12 inpatients.
Whoa.
Oh.
Yeah. You got the record.
I was going to say, that's got to be close to a record for our show.
Yeah, 12 inpatients. And the thing is, like,
Did you ever feel like you were choosing that, or did you always feel pressure?
I think it was a combination most of the time. It was like I never, I can't remember off the top of my head. Like if I ever went and said I'm done, it was kind of like it all came to a head where it was like, you know, my family could see it. I was sick, you know, I was just like, I couldn't, you know, and the main reason I wouldn't want to quit is because of getting sick, because of the dope sickness. And that's what I was so afraid of. And then, you know, I started kind of getting conditioned to that where I'd be like, okay, well, I know if I go to rehab, I'll get better for a while, and they'll put me on some kind of medication so I can like get through it easily without being in hell for, you know, a week or 2 weeks.
You know, it sounds like a wash cycle. I mean,
yeah.
Rinse, repeat,
That's
rinse,
exactly.
repeat, and you just kept doing it, and that was kind of your life. But that couldn't have been your life forever because you're here, you're sober, you're talking to us today. We're going to find out what your rock bottom looks like and what you're doing next on episode 2 of Project Recovery here on KSL.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.